Okay, let's begin.
Good morning. You are listening to Political Pitchforks on AM 1280 The Patriot. I am Susan Smith here with Jeremy Munson, my co-host. And today we have two guests on. We have, first I'll just say Darren Rocha, an attorney who's been on in the past. And also we have Nate George, who is running for Minnesota State Auditor. And this race is really critical for a lot of reasons people probably don't even understand, because the state auditor has not been a position that has been really talked about in my lifetime. I honestly don't think anybody's paid any attention other than when we had like a White Claw problem at in a car accident at a Farm Fest or a Wee Fest or something like that. But and the party van for the DFL. But I think that's all changing, and it's changing because of the massive amounts of fraud being uncovered in Minnesota, which may or may not have anything to do with what the state auditor will do, but certainly is raising people's interest in this race. So I'm looking forward to you talking about why you became a candidate. And also I can't wait to talk about your auditing tool that you want to launch, because I think as we have the Secretary of State side, Steve Simon has taken all the records offline to eliminate transparency in government. Here you are talking about making transparency a thing. So so why don't you tell us about you a little bit and why you're running?
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me on. I'm glad I was able to jump on. But I'm currently the mayor of Braham, Minnesota, and I had zero ambition or desire to get into politics when I did. You could say I was actually coerced into politics, if you really want to go that far. I spoke up at a city council meeting, to make a long story short, and I spoke up because I was disgusted and dismayed at what I was seeing on display there. The conversation revolved around the atrocious financial situation that our previous administration had really driven us into. We were almost $1 million over budget, and our budget's only $2 million to begin with. We were in the hole cash-wise, and our property, we were hit with a property tax levy increase of 48%, and that happened all at once. And so the conversation that was taking place was about, it wasn't centering on, well, how do we manage our money better? How do we not spend so much? It was, well, let's dismantle our police department and get rid of a third of the core services that we're required to provide. That's how we're going to balance our budget. And so obviously that just doesn't make any sense. And the incompetency that was on display, I couldn't be quiet anymore. So I basically, spoke up. I said, in much more eloquent terms, pointing at the mayor, do your job or I'll do it for you. Well, I shouldn't have said that because then after the meeting, I got cornered by about 20 community members who would not let me go home unless I agreed to run for mayor. So fast forward to today, we've just made a huge turnaround in that city. Our fund balances are up over $3 million now. Our cash reserves are at 50%. The state only recommends 25. We filled our industrial park. We brought over $13 million in state and federal funding to the city to replace infrastructure. So we have new streets, new sidewalks, new water lines, new sewer lines, just all the things. We're calling it Braham's Revival. And it really just took someone who was willing to make the effort to go testify at the Capitol, to meet with people, to bring attention to our city, to make those things happen. And so people noticed what happened or what is happening in Braham. And of course, our state's not in a very good situation right now either. And so because of the success there and my ability to lead without having to be asked or told, I was asked to run for state auditor. And so that's why I'm in here today. But also because I have the background and experience to really be effective in that role.
Well, that sounds great. And it's you also have an auditing background in your day job too. You want to just kind of touch on what you do for your day job, your credentials?
Yeah, absolutely. So besides being the mayor, I work full-time for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe Gaming Regulatory Authority. I'm their Director of Licensing Investigations. So I lead a team of investigators. They do background investigations. We investigate allegations of fraud, theft, employee misconduct, all the time. We just opened a couple cases yesterday. And so we build those cases and then we present them for prosecution or for action. So I have a lot of experience dealing with that. We do auditing and compliance as well. We make sure that they're following our gaming regulations. So we have to audit to make sure that's happening. And so we will look for things where they're not quite meeting the minimum standards that we have set, and then holding them accountable for that. In addition to that, I have over 20 years of experience in the U.S. Air Force Reserve. I'm a combat veteran. I served or deployed 3 times to the Middle East and served on Task Force Black and Combined Joint Special Operations Task Forces, where I was helping Special Forces teams look for IED makers overseas. So now I do strategic planning, and I'm in the twilight of my career, so looking for a reason to retire. And this would certainly be a good reason. So,
yeah, well, thank you for your service, Nate. And then, as far as the Democrats are concerned, there's some significant qualifications that you might need to meet to be auditor. Susan had mentioned before we started talking about the White Claw incident of our current auditor. And then Dan Wolgamon, who's kind of the leading Democrat running, has had multiple DWIs. How many DWIs have you had that would qualify you to be state auditor?
0. And I come from a law enforcement background as well as prior deputies. So,
okay.
And I'm not a fan of White Claw, so that might be disqualified.
Okay. That sounds good. Well, how is the race kind of unfolding? So you're running. Elliot Engen is a current state rep who's also running for state auditor. And then this last week, of course, we got to talk about the news where former gubernatorial candidate Scott Jensen, who was the endorsed candidate 4 years ago, who was in the race this year, has pulled out of the governor's race and announced that he is running against you for the nomination for state auditor. Was that kind of a shock when you heard that?
It was, yeah. It explains why he was trying to be buddy at the chili contest in Carver County on Saturday, trying to get information out of me. But yeah, it's disappointing. I think it's an unnecessary distraction in the race at this point, especially this late in the game. It really gives a feel that he's just in it for his own personal ambitions to serve in whatever office he can get his hands on. And he's not in it to serve the public. Whereas that's where I come from, the public asking me to serve as opposed to me going out looking for it. And I have a good job. I have 5 kids and a family to raise at home, and they would love to have me around more often. So I'm doing this because I have the skills to do it well, and the timing is just there. And so if it wasn't for any of those things, I wouldn't be here. And so I hope people take a look at those kinds of things when they consider who to endorse and who to vote for.
Well, and speaking of endorsement, we just have about a minute and a half left of this first segment, but you are seeking the Republican Party endorsement for this race, and will you abide by the endorsement at the state convention?
Absolutely, 100%. I've already publicized that multiple times, and I'm a firm believer you shouldn't be seeking the endorsement if you don't plan to abide by it. It's just common sense.
Yeah. All right,
So
Susan, what are the questions you have for him?
Well, I want to say, hey, Darren, do you have any questions you want to ask? We've got a minute left in this segment. If you, Darren's been, for a lawyer, very quiet this segment, and it's been great listening, to the background, which we need to have for today's show.
Well, thanks for the heads up, and certainly Nate is the far more, I think, relevant and interesting guest on your show today. I just was, as you were introducing it, it dawned on me that again that a state auditor is a bit of a gateway drug in Minnesota. We've had a couple of governors in the last couple of decades, both Governor Carlson, the last Republican to win a majority in a statewide race, and then also Governor Dayton came up through the auditor ranks. I'm wondering, is this a reflection of eventual ambition, Mr. George? Is that something you're considering, or what's your relationship with that transition that has happened in the past from the auditor's position?
So we're going to give you a second to think about it because we're at the end of the session. But I think it's actually a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up, Darren. Yeah. So you're listening to Political Pitchforks. We'll be back in a few moments.
Let's begin.
Welcome back to Political Pitchforks on AM 1280 The Patriot. I am Susan Smith here with Jeremy Munson, Darren Rocha, and also today with Nate George running for auditor. And you were just asked a question about whether or not you want to turn the auditor's race into a run for governor at some point, and maybe give us an answer if you have one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a hard no. Again, I never wanted to get involved in politics in the first place. I'm just here to do what's right in the moment. So,
Well, we appreciate that, and I think we need more people interested in putting the people first and the state first, and so we're going to see how that all turns out for us. I think as voters, obviously. So as we now sort of switch the conversation, let's talk about the state auditor. What is the state auditor? What do they do? And what is the scope of that job, in your opinion? What is the primary focus of the auditor?
yeah, well, I appreciate the question. And that's something that I spend a lot of time traveling around the state talking to folks about. And just last night, I was in Todd County, didn't get home till about midnight. And I've been to all four corners of the state, meeting with local BPOUs and whatnot to just try to educate people on the facts. This isn't about what I think it should do or what I would like it to do. This is just simply, here's what the law says it can and can't do. And you can find that in Chapter 6 of Minnesota State Statutes. Yep. And it's not a very long read. And I encourage people to take the time to go through that. Also, on my Facebook page and on my website is an illustration that kind of helps break it down real simply. The difference between a legislative auditor and the state auditor. The legislative auditor is appointed by the Legislative Audit Commission, and they are the sole oversight of state government and state agencies when it comes to auditing and investigating. It specifically reserves that authority in state statute. So it's not a want versus need issue, it's a legal issue. And similarly in state statute, the authority to audit counties, cities, townships, school boards, and special tax districts is reserved for the state auditor. And so there are actual repercussions that can be had if either entity oversteps its authority, and it has happened in the past.
And does this mean that there's no interplay between the contracts that go from the state government to the cities and the counties and how the counties manage those? Maybe talk about that issue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there's nothing in state statute that prohibits either entity from working with the other. And in fact, they ought to be. Nothing prohibits the state auditor or the legislative auditor from forming a task force. Let's say one or the other starts pulling on a thread, excuse me, and that thread crosses into the other jurisdiction. Well, there's no reason why they can't get each other in the same room and have the same conversation about that issue and work together on that to ensure that we finish pulling that thread all the way to the end. So, and the same thing. Sorry,
so I just want to cut in there. So the difference here is that the state auditor is a partisan position, right? You got a Democrat or a Republican running, whereas the Office of Legislative Auditor is a nonpartisan and has been traditionally very neutral in its direction. So there's going to be a conflict either way. And I know that the state auditor is really focused at the county level, but all of the programs that we've seen this massive fraud from, food stamps and daycare and everything else, the counties are where the recipients of those taxpayer funds are certified to be eligible for these programs. So if even though that the money comes from the state, it is the county level where this corruption starts. And we've been focusing on the people running the daycare as being guilty, but the parents who are participating in this fraud are the ones that are certified to be eligible for these programs or continue receiving funds through the counties. And so it really is at the county level that most of this fraud, in my opinion, could be addressed. Do you see it the same way?
I think that it's a very nuanced issue that doesn't lie solely at one level. I think we're seeing that actually spreads across multiple levels. And that's where we get into that conversation where, well, really, we should be having all these different entities working together to pull on that thread and fix all of the problems related at every level, whether it's the way that the state is overseeing those funds through a lack of internal controls and oversight, or at the county level where it's not being properly managed at that level either. The problem is the auditing apparatus as a whole in our state is so fragmented that we don't have that good collaboration that would facilitate that like we should.
Now, one of the so I served on the Health and Human Services Committee, the Policy and Finance Committee. So we heard testimony from counties and then the state, and part of their difficulty in finding fraud is due to the archaic technology. Right, they're using like all IBM mainframe AS400 system, 4000 systems or whatever. But
Right.
with the advent of AI today, you could extract data in these large tables and use AI to compare and find some of these. I mean, there's so much you can do with AI, even with the archaic technology that our data sets are in now. I
Right.
think there's a lot of opportunity to root out fraud using that technology as well. And then, really trying to hold people accountable. How do you see AI or other technologies or anti-money laundering laws or rules that could be applied here to root out some of the people that are in state government that are cooperating with this or participating in this fraud from taxpayers?
Yeah, so Title 31, AML laws and stuff, I work with that every single day. Very familiar with that realm of things. But one of the things that I would like to do if I became state auditor is appoint one of my deputy auditors to really oversee that technology piece inside of the house, and someone who's really strong in that area. And I already have a couple people in mind. Um, but absolutely, I think they're already gathering that data through the Government Information Division, and they're plugging it into dashboards. They're not presenting it in the way that I would like to see it presented, which leads me to the concept that I unveiled yesterday. But absolutely, AI can cut a lot of man hours, reduce the need for additional staffing, and just do government smarter instead of bigger by perusing that data and identifying those, flagging those areas of concern that can be dived into deeper.
So I have a question, and maybe Darren, you'll even weigh in on this. One of the issues, and again, I think oftentimes Minnesotans have been disconnected from how government works. People haven't
Mm-hmm.
been driven to really track how government works from the state down through the counties to the local level. And so I think that, for example, take the foster care system, which we know
Mm-hmm.
there's always concerns about. And so you have the state with a lot of rules, regulations, licensing. And a lot of professions are regulated at the state level. And then you'll have an enforcement, you'll have laws that people work under, and then there's this enforcement action or implementation at the county level. And the question, so the agency, the state agency transfers a lot of its power and oversight duties to these county officials. And often there seems to be a breakdown in the oversight of the people doing the work. And
Yep.
and then the counties they oversee the providers who are dealing with the families who've had to qualify often at the state level and then get put into a system. And so, Darren, it's actually really confusing even for the people functioning within these systems. And I don't know, Darren, if you want to talk about that a little bit, about how to manage this.
Well, and I would add on top of that, the ability for the public to even pay attention to this Byzantine process
Right.
is overwhelmed by social media and the information. I mean, you can have a massive story about massive fraud in one day, and before you even get a chance to finish reading that article, another major issue pops up on the either state or national screen. So just getting people to pay attention and long enough to try to understand these things, I think, is a real challenge. But the other part of it, Susan, as you describe, the how this authority is transferred down to the local level, at every stage you have personalities that will ultimately determine whether any enforcement or oversight is conducted. I had an incident, this is now 15 years ago, where I had a party ask me to follow up with a county attorney about something that they knew about that was in violation of state law in the healthcare delivery system. And I ultimately contacted the county attorney, and the county attorney just flat out said, "We're not touching that." I mean, I provided them with evidence of a problem, and it was kind of a combination of a lack of resources for that office, but also a lack of political will, and it was not to the advantage of that office to take it on. We're seeing that here tremendously, right? I mean, we saw people testifying at the legislature that, well, the statute says we may conduct oversight. It doesn't say shall. And it's like, well, who in their right mind with any integrity is going to take that position, is going to say, well, I have evidence of fraud, but because it's not mandatory that I take it on, even though this office is empowered to do it, I'm just not going to take it on. And so, God bless the auditor's position at legislative auditor and their nonpartisan role, which I've been very impressed. Jim Nobles, I think, was a state treasurer for a long time. Treasurer, not treasurer, but he was just wonderful. Saw him do things with the university and other state agencies that I was amazed anybody had the courage and the conviction to take those positions. The state auditor, and I think Jeremy framed it really well. I know a lot of us are looking at it saying, well, I'd like to see that be expansive. I'd like to see that position be more assertive. And you can see why the sort of single party rule for so long, when you had this growth in the NGO funding, all of which has very much benefited the political ambitions of one of the parties, has led to somebody in the position that did not take an active role in going after these things. And so, I mean, I'm talking broadly about your question, Susan, but it really is an issue. It is an issue that is very complex, that even practitioners of law and practitioners in the health and human services area have a hard time really understanding who owns this and who can be held accountable for it. Because if no one's accountable for it, I don't think anything's going to change.
Right. We'll pick this up after the break. Thanks for listening to Political Pitchforks.
Okay, let's begin.
Welcome back to Political Pitchforks on AM 1280 The Patriot. This is Jeremy Munson with Susan Smith and Darren Rocha, and we are interviewing Nate George, candidate for Minnesota State Auditor. Nate, I'm running for state senate. I've been out talking to a lot of people. I mentioned fraud. I served in the legislature 3 terms. I was on the Health and Human Services Committee when Jim Nobles and others came forward to testify back in 2018 about how half of the $240 million a year being spent on childcare assistance was being stolen, right? A lot of it going to Somalia. Talked about just fake daycares and this collusion with parents to steal taxpayer money to the tune of $120 million or a year or more. And it had been going on since 2014 at that time, 4 years of it. It was so bad that I wrote a bill that would end CCAP until they could prove that these daycares were legitimate. People were legitimately sending their kids to daycare, right? It wasn't enough to just tweak the rules or call for more audits. It was shut it down. I got all of 9 Republicans in the House and Senate to sign on to that bill in support. There wasn't an appetite. I feel like now with this Nick Shirley stuff, there should be enough appetite to shut it down. I know the federal government and the Trump administration had put a freeze on things to try to force compliance. It doesn't sound like that's happening. When I talk to delegates out there about what their feelings are on fraud, they want people being perp walked. They don't want strongly worded letters or calls for more audits. We've done enough audits. We know that there's money being stolen. They want arrest. I think it's been 8 years since I wrote that bill, and there's been like all of 8 people sent to jail. There should be thousands of people being arrested, including the parents who have been participating in this fraud with the daycare center owners. What are you hearing from people? Are they patient, or are they going to see? Do they demand arrests? And are things going to happen before this election?
Yeah, I think it'll be tough to tie anything to the very, very, very top. I think there's plenty of plausible deniability there. I'm not a lawyer, but I think just from an investigation standpoint, it would be hard unless you could come up with some direct evidence. Much like what we see for the AG, right? And you can't deny that you're on recorded audio colluding with folks that are involved. And
Yeah,
so
well,
that
let's
would
just
be,
talk about that. There was a testimony. So Keith Ellison went to Congress this week and testified, and they talked about this conversation that he had with the Feeding Our Future fraudsters, right?
right.
And all this money. So can you explain to the listeners what went down?
Yeah. So he basically, I'm trying to remember his first name, I think, but Senator Hawley beat him up really good about his involvement and the extent of it. And at the very least, if not uh, coordinating the fraud, facilitating it. And, Keith Ellison, with a very cavalier attitude, sat back and denied everything and just tried to push back on the senator. But, at the end of the day, he was denying that essentially that this audio even existed and that there's any evidence to, suggest that he's involved in any way. And it just really speaks to the level of, I don't know if cavalierness is a word, but I'm using it, and the disregard and contempt for the law that these people have, that they just truly feel like nothing's going to happen to them. And so that's where I would be looking first, especially since the AG's office is the one with primary oversight of NGOs. And so if there is an issue with an NGO or a complaint, it goes to his office first. And they're the ones that are responsible for investigating it with their charities division.
So I think
And
this point that you're bringing up, I think it is important because Keith Ellison was in Congress for several years and returned to
Yep.
Minnesota to become the AG, kind of at a crucible moment when these programs really were kind of launched. And I think it does beg the question. I certainly know I'm not the only person raising this issue. Was that an intentional move here to ensure that there was an AG in place who would provide the kind of lack of oversight that we've actually seen that allowed this to mushroom, in Minnesota's backyard? And those are legitimate questions, and I'm sure he's going to have to answer those questions, I think.
So I know that Nate, I know that you're the one that works for the casinos, but I'm going to ask Darren, if you were a betting man, would you bet that Keith Ellison is going to be perp walked or arrested by the election day this year?
So I'm not a huge gambler, but I mean, spending money on fishing bait is the most I'll invest in the prospect of a big return. But if I had to bet, I'd guess I would bet he's not. I think that the system is very much against holding folks in his position accountable. Of course, all that turns on whether some piece of evidence comes forward that makes it very clear that, and I mean, and some people would argue it already exists, right? I mean, he's having this conversation, he receives funding from them shortly thereafter, and he's having a conversation where he's basically saying he's going to manipulate his duties in office to benefit these folks, and then in exchange, they reward him for it. But something that would be even more direct, because with that there, and I think with a fairly assertive administration in DC, we haven't seen that happen yet. And in the state of Minnesota, being a single party rule for as long as we have, it does not appear that there's a political will or anyone that's willing to step forward at the state level to take these kinds of things on. So I would bet it probably won't. What does everyone's gut tell them? I think, as you point out, your potential constituents are seeing it and saying, look, based on what they're seeing and just the obvious, there should be accountability. But if I had to put a dollar down, it would be on, no, at least not based on what evidence is in front of us now.
I want to raise this issue. It seems to me that one of the things that I would expect should happen is that because of the taint of this issue going kind of across the entire government, that I would expect what we're going to see over the next few months is actually these people that are in power are just going to not run again. That there's several months now where we're likely going to see a turnover in people, because if you're the Democrat Party and you just replace the candidates, with other candidates. That actually, for people who just do vote D, right? They're just going to vote D again. But there are a group of people who just might not vote at all if they're so sick of the fraud and if they themselves recognize this is not okay. So to me, politically, from a strategic standpoint, the smartest thing to do is to convince these people, probably with lucrative jobs, in other places, that they'll just not run again. They won't resign. They'll just announce they're not going to run again, which will take away the appetite for a lot of people to even go after them. I mean, I just, that would be my guess. So I don't know what you guys think about that, but I think we may see a lot of, and that could even apply to people in the legislature who also may have been on committees or things like that who should have, we just may see more people walking away.
Well,
I think you could argue that that's why Julie Blaha is not running.
Well, and when Tim Walz announced he was running for, seeking the rare third term, or unprecedented in recent years for sure, I said right away, he's not running.
Right,
There's no way
exactly.
he's running.
No
And
way.
he's holding the position, and people talked about Nick Shirley's video causing him to step back. Well, I don't believe that at all either. I mean,
Right.
he made his announcement the first Monday after the holidays, which is
Right.
exactly when you would have made that announcement. I
Yep.
think that he's being set up as he's to carry the DFL sins out to the desert
Exactly.
and try to bring somebody in who supposedly doesn't have the taint of what is obviously a 90-10 type issue for Minnesota voters. So I think that I think that's I think we're seeing it already, Susan, that's some folks that are saying, well, I don't want to take this heat. And then one of the things I think is amazing, how come the media no one in the media has asked Amy Klobuchar, or maybe she hasn't just even been available, sort of like in her last race where she was in her basement the whole time. But no one's asked her, would you appoint Tim Walz to fill out your term? Because the first thing I said when he stepped back, it's like, well, obviously they made him a deal he couldn't refuse. And what are they offering him? How are they going to take care of him? Because between his political ambition and his ego, he didn't just walk away from it. There's been some conversation there. And so time will tell as we go forward what that looks like.
Yeah, Nate, so I wanted to also ask you about your campaign. You've been running now since, I think, November when you got in the race. Where are you sitting financially? Because a lot of these campaigns, it takes a lot of money to run statewide. What did you report for your year-end numbers? Or if you want to share an updated number, we'd be happy to hear that.
Yeah, so I've actually been running since the state fair that I announced live on the Garage Logic podcast. And the fundraising piece has been a struggle for me specifically because nobody knows who I am outside of the city of Bram. I mean, a lot better now than they did then. But so I think we ended the year with just over $5,000. And we've got several large donations and many grassroots donations since the first of the year as well. So we're well past that now. But I'm not necessarily out there trying to raise as much money as I can, as fast as I can. I'm focused on running a smart, lean, efficient campaign because honestly, if we're looking at a candidate for state auditor and we're going to elect somebody who just their sole goal is to spend as much money as possible, I don't want them looking after my tax dollars. I want somebody who's going to run an equally effective campaign on as little money as possible, because that tells me that they know what they're doing when it comes to money.
Okay. And then briefly, can you talk about the endorsements that you received? I think you got one legislative endorsement and several mayors and things. Yeah,
several city mayors, City of Cross Lake Mayor Jackson Purfeast. I'm waiting on his, he wants to make a fancy graphic for me to put out there, but I'm waiting on that, but he has supported me. Tom Berg, Mayor of Lonsdale, Luke Merrill, Mayor of Isanti, Brandon Weiberg of Taylor's Falls, the mayor there, State Representative Jimmy Gordon, and some others that are supporting me privately because they want to maintain their relationships with Elliott, of course. So, but that list continues to grow as well. So.
We will be back in just a couple moments with Political Pitchforks.
Okay, let's begin.
Welcome back to Political Pitchforks. This is Susan Smith here with Jeremy Munson, Darren Rocha, and candidate for state auditor Nate George. And I do want to just quick comment on this issue of money. And I think in politics, we've all been attuned to this constant narrative about money, 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 money. Everything is about the money, money, money. And I just really appreciate the candidates who understand that it's not supposed to be about the money. It's supposed to be about the people. And the candidates who are out meeting people, shaking hands, looking people in the eye when they have hard conversations about what's going on. I think that that is what our voters are looking for increasingly. And there's all kinds of money pouring into all kinds of races from all kinds of places. And the committees are transferring money to each other. And it's just a disaster. It's really, I think, it's money laundering political style. And I really think it's tragic. And it's why we're in this mess, to be honest with you. And so I really do believe that candidates who go out, find volunteers, those volunteers who believe in them, who share that message, who go to their churches and their communities and their kids' baseball games over the summer, and who will walk in the parades and they will put up the signs. And I just think that it's so important that we return our political system back to what it was supposed to be, which is about local people making local decisions so that the people they elect represent them and carry those people with them in every meeting they serve on in whatever level of government they are on. And I really think you're talking about that. That's what you're talking about. I think that's what we need. We need more of that approach to politics if we're really going to clean up not just Minnesota, but our country. And so I want to thank you for any effort you do to bring the people back into this process. Then that leads us to the thing I suggested earlier I wanted to talk about, which is on your website, Facebook page. You are talking about an auditing tool. And I think it's really critical for you to talk about this because too often people don't even know where to begin to look. Searching for things on Google when you get 1.2 million results in 3.6 seconds, and most of those things are promoted and you don't even know if they're relevant. And it's overwhelming, actually, the amount of information. So being able to go to a tool and put in information, your city, click, click, click. So I really want you to talk about this because I think this is how we restore trust in government is we give people access to information. So if you could tell us about this tool. How's it going to work?
Yeah, and not only that, but the accountability lies with the public, right? Everybody knows what's going on because we pull back the curtain, there's no hiding anymore, and you can't escape from that. And so making that information available to the public so that they can hold their local leaders accountable is really the crux of this whole idea. And so no other state currently has anything like this. I tried to research as best I could and I couldn't find anything. But it's the same concept as, we all have individual credit scores, whether we want one or not. And that credit score is to inform potential investors or lenders the likelihood of the risk of them getting their money back if they were to invest in you or lend you money. The same concept when it comes to local government, which is the purview of the state auditor. And so every county, city, township, school board would have a fraud risk score assigned to them. And there would be things that inform that score, like minimum internal control standards or absence of those standards. Separation of financial duties. Can one person make a purchase, write the check, and sign that check? Or is it spread out amongst multiple decision makers? Fund balances over time. Are we seeing sharp increases and sharp decreases and really inconsistent fund balances, which would indicate fraudulent activity is occurring? And other things that would go into it as well. And so that information would be aggregated. A lot of that stuff is already being collected via the Government Information Division of the State Auditor's Office. They already have the dashboard system in place. They're just not presenting the data in this way. And so it wouldn't require any additional spending or budgetary appropriations to make it happen. It's literally using the resources and the tools that are already there to make data more consumable by the public. And so you can log on to this dashboard and, like you said, punch in your county or your city, and then boom, it pops up with this score, whether they're low, moderate, high risk for fraud, and then the indicators that go into that score as to why that is the case. and it's just right there. There's no digging, there's no perusing 100+ page audit in financial summaries. It's just there you go. And then they can take that information back to their local leaders and hold them accountable for it and say, hey, what are you doing to fix this? If our score is high, what are you doing to make it lower? And the thing that a lot of people like about it is if the legislature jumps on board with it, then they incorporate it into their legislation when it comes to awarding state financial grants. You can use that fraud risk score and require a benchmark and say, hey, if you want to be eligible for this state grant money, you as a local entity must first have a minimum fraud risk score of moderate or higher or lower, sorry, because that encourages proactive mitigation. And so they're making the effort to ensure that they can safeguard those tax dollars before they've even received the funds.
Okay. Nate, I want to ask you a question about my understanding is that local counties who are under the purview of the state auditor have the option of hiring an outside auditing firm so that they are not subject to the state auditor or something like that. Can you explain
Correct.
that and how that works?
Yeah, everybody has that option. In fact, that's what the state auditor's office was sued for and found to be overstepping their authority back in 2000, I believe 17 it was, with Rebecca Otto. She was trying to require everybody utilize the CTAS system, which is the system that the state auditor's office already has in place for financial reporting. But the law was changed to allow flexibility and local entities from having to use that because they could find that service cheaper through a third party.
Okay. So if you become state auditor and you see that much of the fraud is being perpetrated through Hennepin and Ramsey counties, and you want them to do something or apply certain standards, why can't they then hire the Somali Learning Center's auditing service to be auditing them and not subject to what you're asking them to do?
Well, they could. The point of this is the aggregation and presentation of the data that is discovered in that audit. So even though they're using a third party auditor, they still have to submit a comprehensive report to the state auditor's office. So even though somebody else is doing the work, they still have to report their findings back to the OSA.
But they could deny giving you the details or the data for that. I'm just wondering if there's legislation that we need to do to push through the legislature to make sure that to remove that option, right? If that's a barrier to this. And I also think there's a lot of this fault is on the legislature for not writing or for not writing specific language into laws. When I was in the Health and Human Services Committee and they wanted to give $5 million to the community most impacted by AIDS, and I asked in the committee, well, wouldn't this be in Africa? It doesn't say Minnesota. Oh, maybe we should write that in there. So we need to make sure that the legislature is putting tighter guardrails on a lot of these programs in spending appropriations. But I'd also like to see the auditor role as having more authority to go into some of these counties where we know corruption is happening.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because I actually, as part of my unveiling to the press yesterday, I also included a proposed bill that I drafted that I gave to legislatures for review currently that changes or amends Chapter 6 of the state statute to require this score for starters, and also goes through and lays out the requirements for including it in future legislation as well. And I agree. I think that we have this system that taxpayers are paying for that doesn't have to get used, but it has to be maintained. That just doesn't make any sense to me financially.
Okay. Now, Nate, how do people get a hold of your campaign? We just have less than a minute left here. How do they get a hold of your campaign, and how can they find more information about you?
Yeah, so my website is www.nategeorge4, that's FOR, stateauditor.com. You can email me at nate@nategeorge.com, or you can give me a call anytime, 651-276-1948. Happy to chat.
They can find you on Facebook too?
Yep, Facebook at Nate George for MN State Auditor.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on. I encourage everybody to get out and learn more about these important state constitutional offices, state auditor, attorney general, secretary of state, as well as the governor. We need to win a Republican trifecta in order to change course for our state. Susan, you want to sign us off?
Hey, I want to thank both of you for being here. Darren, we really appreciate you adding
Thank
some
you.
insight in, and your work as an attorney is really helpful. And Nate, best of luck to you. I'm looking forward to
Appreciate
hearing you talk about how you're going to raise the discussion and make these debates that are going to be happening much more meaningful to voters as they try and make their decisions. So thanks very much for joining us on Political Pitchforks. We'll be back next week.